Hi.
Hi,
Hello.
how's
Hi.
it going?
Hi.
Hi.
Okay, and
Good.
you?
I'm
So
good.
glad you're with us, Al.
Yes, I switched to my hotspot, so I'm now here. But yeah, I'm so glad to
Okay,
be here.
great.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you for joining
Um,
us.
Yes,
this
I'm
is
so happy
the
to be
Talking
here.
Back to Suicide podcast, and our special guest today is Aaliyah, also known as Al Davis, right? And you and I met each other, I think it was back in October, when you had applied on Upwork as a singer songwriter for a poem lyric that I had done called Suicide Lies. And we corresponded after that. And I was very touched and moved by what you shared with me. And I'm going to just read a couple of lines of what you had written. You had said, I use the arts to heal myself from my own trauma and suffering. I make music that helps me express what I've gone through. And it makes me stronger realizing I can share my story with the world. And then I had asked you, for your response to reading the lyric Suicide Lies. And you said, I read Suicide is a Liar out loud to myself, and it made me feel powerful because every word of it is true. Suicide is a liar, and it tricks you into thinking that it would be so easy to just give up, but you don't realize the terrible impact it has on your family and friends, as well as the people you haven't yet met. Suicide awareness isn't talked about enough. And I think it's great that you are. And you are talking about it too. And that's why we wanted to invite you onto the show. So please, Al, kind of
Yes,
take it away in any direction that you'd like to begin with.
sure. 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with schizoaffective bipolar disorder, as well as generalized anxiety disorder. And it was easily the hardest thing I've ever been through. I attempted suicide twice, about 2 years ago, and it wasn't because of the act itself. Like I I wanted, I didn't want to die, but I just was so tired of all this mental illness that was beating on me. But the hard part was seeing how it affected my mom. She was devastated. I remember I was in the hospital room. They had an IV in me because I had overdosed. And because to be honest, I didn't really take it seriously. I was just like, I had no sense of self-preservation. So I was like, I had this voice in my head telling me that I was just a body and that all that was left was just to end the body's life. And so I didn't really see any problem with committing suicide, but then when I realized the impact it has on other people, how much they care about you, and it made me realize I need to start fighting. And so I started fighting, and I went to the psychiatric hospital 25 times, and each of those times is because of that suicidal ideation. And but the thing was, instead of actually acting on it, what I did was I asked for help. I um i like would call the suicide hotline. Me and the suicide hotline, we were friends. I called them so much, and they helped me so much. And I would call my mom, I'd call my dad, finding that support system. And when I needed to go to the hospital, I would go, and I would get my medicines, readjusted, and we would try something new. I'd go home, and I do my best to live my life. And then, of course, it always, with my illness being as severe as it is, I constantly ended up in the hospital. I was in the hospital a couple weeks ago. And it can be really debilitating to have to keep going back and keep asking for help. And it feels like you fail each time. But what I realize is I'm not failing. I'm succeeding because I'm alive. And being alive is what matters, And one of my friends yesterday, I was beating myself up for having an anxiety attack and not being able to recover properly from it. And she was like, look, you got out of bed, you went to you went in public, you showered, you're doing great. And I was like, you know what, I am. And it was really hard for me to it's about that mindset. It's easy to see it as everything as a failure, and when you see everything as a failure, that's when the suicidal ideation starts to kick in, because you start seeing yourself as worthless. And but when you change that mindset and see yourself as something that's worthy of living, that's an actual human being, that's when the suicidal ideation can't touch you. So that's my story.
Wow.
As you were speaking, Al, um, you made me think of something I've not thought of before, and
Mm-hmm.
that is, um, and I'll put in parenthesis that so many years ago when I was in medical school, I had attempted suicide too and was medically hospitalized. Um, but what you made me think of was that in that suicidal state of mind, you can feel dead to yourself.
Right.
It's like you're dead. You're almost like already dead, and now you're just doing the final act of being dead. But,
Right.
and this is a new thought, but you're not dead to other people.
Exactly.
That's important to remember. You're very much alive to them. And if we can keep that in our mind, I think it can shift us into not acting on that suicidal thought, because that deadness, it sort of has like a ripple effect. And I know that I was not at all thinking about my family. They weren't in my mind at all, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
if just a little tiny bit, I thought about my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister or some friends, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would have definitely helped me. But in that state of mind, it was all dark and there wasn't one glimmer. I was dead to me, but I forgot that I was alive to them. And being alive to them, I kind of agree with what you said, that that life is worth living, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's something to hold on to. I may feel dead to me, but I'm alive to them, right?
Right.
And if I'm alive, there must be something worthwhile that I'm alive and they see me as alive.
Yes. Exactly. So many, there's there's a saying that I hate. I will say I hate it, because people say suicide is the most selfish act you can do. And I see where they're coming from, because you're hurting other people. But the thing is, it's not you that's hurting those other people. You just have, like, it's like someone put sunglasses on you, but they're tinted too dark and you can only see a little bit, you know? And people think you're just wearing glasses, and they're like, well, why can't you see? And I think suicidal ideation, it makes you feel like it isolates you. It makes you feel like the people that care about you don't care. My brain would constantly tell me they'll get over it, but even when my mom, would tell me all the time, if you died, I would never recover. And you know, I think the important thing about overcoming that suicidal ideation is just to take off those sunglasses and use your ears and listen to what people are telling you. but at the same time not beating yourself up for having that suicidal ideation, because it's not your fault. And when you start believing like it's your fault, that's when you start getting in the danger zone, in my opinion.
Um, you mentioned about schizoaffective. You also mentioned bipolar. Um,
Mm,
if you're comfortable doing so, right? If I want you to take care of
yes.
yourself, right? Could you describe some of just the symptoms that you
Yes.
realize that something? And I want to say that sometimes we don't realize that they're a symptom. We just think that's me, right? But then in
Mm,
retrospect, it's like, oh, that was not normal, right? But what kind of
right.
changes in your thinking, your mood, your sleep, your behavior, what kind of changes did there start to happen over time?
So the biggest thing that happened was I started having these episodes that they called psychosis, where I fully believed that there was another person inside of me, and I even named him. This person's name was Mo, and he would take over my body, and he would like tell me, I would like hallucinate, and he would tell me, you're already dead. All that's left is to kill your body. And he would make me, I would move on like slow motion towards the dangerous things. And I was fighting it the whole time. It was like I was watching from behind a glass, I just would lose most control. And in these episodes, I would act like almost on impulse. Like I remember one really bad episode that happened. My mom had her Bible study friends over, and I had an episode, and what it was triggered by the stupidest thing. I had tried to put braids in my hair, and it didn't work, and that's what triggered it. That feeling of failure started the episode, and by the time her friends had come over, I was gone. I could barely speak, I could barely move, and then when I did move, it was just bizarre. I would take a cup of water and just dump it on the table. I would take napkins and just tear them up. I was not myself at all. And then what happened was I eventually started speaking and saying, Aaliyah's not here right now. All that's left is to kill her body. And my mom's friends, it was so bad that they thought I was possessed, and they actually tried to perform an exorcism on me, which was not fun at all. And I was like screaming, and I was like, they were holding me down. I remember I kept saying, take me to the hospital, because I deep down I knew this was not safe behavior. I knew I had to go to the hospital. But the thing was, my mom had taken me so many times by then, because I kept having this psychosis, that she was getting desperate, and she was like, let's just try this and see how it works. And you know I just remember it was extremely traumatic, and it all started because of that psychosis. They took it took several years for them to find the right balance of medicines in my body. They had me on two different antipsychotics, a mood stabilizer, and anxiety medicine, among other medications. So I was taking like 7 pills at once. And but the problem was the two antipsychotics were interacting with each other, and the doctors didn't know that. So they just kept increasing the dosage until it basically sedated me. So it was just, schizoaffective disorder is very difficult to deal with. On the medical aspect and also on the physical aspect. It's just it's it's complicated, and it just takes you, like, after I first started the schizoaffective disorder, I lost myself. I lost my view of myself as a human being. I just, even now I struggle to see myself as something that exists because the disorder took that away from me.
I know you had shared with me of your song Ghost Town. When
Hmm.
when did you write that song? And could you also, like, when and what inspired it? And maybe say some of the lyrics?
Yes. So Ghost Town, I think that was the first song I wrote. And like I consider it to be like the new age of my music. I had dabbled in some songs, but when I really became like Al Janet, my music name, that's when I Ghost Town was the first one I started, and I wrote it about how just mental illness sort of carved me out and left a ghost town inside of my brain, because when you have all these illnesses battling inside of you, it leaves you feeling dead inside. And so some of the lyrics of Ghost Town is like, it's a ghost town. All my emotions have been burned down deep down under the ground. It's a ghost town. No living beings left to be found. I lost myself somehow. And those lyrics mean, it's like burning down is a very violent act. And when I first developed my illness, it felt very like a sudden onset, like, whoa, what's happening? And it felt like everything I knew had been burned down to the ground and buried, and I couldn't, get back to it. I couldn't find it anymore. I couldn't find myself. And another lyric I like from Ghost Town in the second verse or third verse, I forget, but it's like I it's a ghost town. See the little girl cry with no sound. She doesn't exist, but she does. And what I really like about that is because I feel a separation between me and my younger self. I have had like this sort of thing with me where I feel like by doing that first suicide attempt, I killed my younger self. And even though I didn't die, a part of me did. And that youth about me, that I was forced to mature very quickly. And so that youth that I used to have, that energy and that full life, it feels like it had been crushed and buried. And the little girl crying but there's no sound. you know um she's reaching out to me saying like, hey, I'm here, but I can't hear it because she is just gone. I can't reach her anymore. And that was something that I really had to process, that i I'm an adult now, and I have to move on. And that's one of the hardest things I've ever had to do.
In writing the song, um, was it cathartic for you? Was it beneficial in any way to express all those painful feelings? And if yes, why? Why was it helpful?
So I definitely say yes. For me, music has been a major outlet for processing these emotions. It's almost like a bridge between me and my emotions because I have trouble processing them naturally. So when I made this song, I was like, and I added like the ghost sounds and the howling, and it made me realize this is what I feel, you know. And I struggle with like thought patterns. I don't have very many active thoughts in my head. And that I believe is because when I first developed my schizoaffective disorder, they tried out electroconvulsive therapy on me, and they did 53 rounds of it, and I believe it damaged my brain. So I struggle to have like processing things and having thought patterns. So when I make songs, it's like my way of actually processing those emotions. So Ghost Town definitely helped with that.
Are you able to play a bit of the song?
Yes. I believe I can play it on my computer. Let me just, because my computer, even though it's being mean to me, I think I have it. Let me just look it up real quick. Hold on. Cause yeah, Ghost Town was the first song I made in like the new age, and it was just it was really cathartic for me. Um yeah, I really like it. File Explorer.
While you're looking for the song, is it a commercial release or is it just something
Oh
in
yeah, it's
between?
released. It's on like
Release.
Spotify and it's oh here it is. No, that's instrumental. It's on Spotify, YouTube Music. It's out everywhere. Um and yeah, it's I used a distribution platform called CD Baby, and it was really good. It just got it out there. And I've released quite a few songs now, including that album. Um and I'm trying to create a career as an artist. You know, I'm working on my second album now, actually, called Metamorphosis. And it talks about just me evolving, into a new person. Oh, you know what? I have BandLab open. Let me use that. Okay, I've almost got it. Sorry, it's
Okay.
taking so long.
Oh, that's
Uh,
okay.
yeah, my computer is very, but yeah, I love making music. It's literally one of my favorite things. Um, it releases something for me. Um,
I could
where is
really see that song being performed live, and there'd also be like a light show with it.
I've
Think it
actually
lit.
done something like that,
Have
and
you?
I found Ghost Town. So this is Ghost Town. Here we go. Can you hear it okay? Oh, this is the instrumental. Hold on.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. There's different versions. I had to make an instrumental because I was performing it live. Um okay. I'm going to turn the voice back on. Yeah, it's technology, man. Um
I was about to say play the instrumental and sing the song.
oh,
Yeah.
really? I can do that.
Can you?
Um
Yeah.
okay.
That'll be
Sure.
better. That'll be
Yeah.
better.
Okay. I'll
Uh-huh.
do that.
Yeah.
Live performance.
Live performance. Here we go.
It's a ghost town. All my emotions have been burned down. Deep down under the ground. It's a ghost town. No living being left to be found. I lost myself somehow. Who am I supposed to be if there's no such thing as me? And how am I supposed to cry if I watch my emotions die? It's a ghost town. It's a ghost town. Don't know how to smile or frown. I'm afraid I've lost my humanity. Don't house inside of me. It's a ghost town, sitting on my throne but with no crown, wondering who I am or who I was. It's a ghost town, hear a little girl cry with no sound. She doesn't exist, but she does.
Yes, we can see you
Okay.
now. You are no longer a ghost. We can see you.
Thank you for
Wonderful.
that. Thank you for being so comfortable in singing. I was just telling Diana when you went off that, she said good idea, Kino. I said it wasn't even an idea. I was just thinking out loud. But here we go.
Mhm.
We had you perform the song live instead of just a snippet.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah. I've got to ask on my side with regards to what you said about possession. Okay. I believe it does exist. Okay.
Mhm.
Especially when you're young, really young. When you're a kid, even in your teens, it's easier for evil spirits and evil demons to sort of, possess a body. We've seen it all in movies, but this does exist. It's out there.
Mhm.
When you were told that, this could be a possession, what were your thoughts?
I was thinking like, well, for one, I wasn't thinking because my brain was just turned off. Mo had basically taken over, and my only thoughts really were, I need to go to the hospital, and that's all I could think was that this was a dangerous situation, and I was not safe, and I needed to go to the hospital. It was almost a habit at that point. So when they told me I was possessed, I didn't really process it. I was like, I just need to go to the hospital. And I literally, like, that was the only thing I could think of, when they were holding me down and chanting and stuff. I just kept screaming, I need to go to the hospital. And, like, I asked my mom to go to the bathroom. And when I came out, I, like, ran to my sister's room. I was like, call dad. I need him to take me to the hospital. And, when at one point I tried to walk out the door because I was gonna walk to the hospital myself, and it was like 100 miles away. Like, I just wasn't thinking properly. But all I could think of was, I need to get myself to safety.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's just I just wanted your take on it. Your take on it.
Yeah.
Like,
So
how do we,
yeah, looking back
how,
on it, I honestly could say, you know, Mo was very demonic to me. He seemed like he definitely wasn't human. And he would literally take me over as if I was possessed. And so I could very well see that possession could have been happening because he just was not a human thing. He was not a thought process. He was something physical, but more like metaphysical.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the dots I was attempting to connect here. Between Mo, being told by a family, okay, possession, him taking over. No, I was just like
Mhm.
connecting, that dots. Based on reading, these articles of real life examples and, you
Mhm.
know, yeah. And the fact that they try to perform exorcism on you, has it ever like affected you psychologically growing up from that moment?
Yes, definitely. It's definitely one of the most traumatic things that's ever happened to me because
Yeah.
I felt so not in control. I felt like I was begging and pleading for them to stop. I'm very sensitive to loud noises, and they were shouting at me, chanting and stuff, and they were holding me down. It was literal torture. And they wouldn't listen. Even when I told them that I'm back, I was like, hey, I'm back. I'm not mow anymore. I'm ready. They didn't believe me, and they kept doing what they were doing. And it wasn't until it lasted 2 hours, and it wasn't until after I had calmed down enough for them to leave, then my mom finally took me to the hospital. But I was, scarred from that because I felt like, you know, it felt like they hated me almost. Like they didn't see me as Al, they saw me as Mo. And they didn't see me as a human being. They saw me as some possessed thing, and that they needed to get rid of. And I just felt less than human.
Do you think by any chance that maybe, Mo was this demonic spirit, but your whole household was actually, under some sort of demonic spell or spirit?
I think that's definitely a possibility because, this all started with my parents' divorce.
Yeah.
It left a bad energy in the house. And, my parents divorced a few years ago. And then, literally, like a month later or something, I got hospitalized for bipolar disorder. And then later, I started getting hospitalized for schizoaffective bipolar disorder. And the house, my sister would stay in her room all the time. It was really just me and my mom, and my mom was just broken, from my illness, from the divorce. It was just too much for her. And so the household just had a lot of really bad, almost demonic energy. It sucked the life out of you.
What
Yeah.
was it like when you got to the hospital? How did the staff treat you? What was helpful? What potentially was not helpful when you got to the hospital?
So I've had a pretty good experience at the hospital. I've been to some really bad ones, but I've also been to some really good ones. So for the helpful stuff, my favorite part of the hospital is the group therapy and the group activities. There's a lot of games we play. There's a lot of learning we do about cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and those help me a lot. And you know also just being around people like you, it's more comforting. Now, the other side is sometimes hospitals are not the best places, especially when the staff get frustrated with you because they don't understand, but they think they understand. So around last year, I started having really bad migraines that literally would paralyze me. They would make me have seizures. They'd make me have confusion, and I didn't know what was going on. So I would go to the hospital for it, and they would be like, "Get up and walk. You can walk." I was at a hospital in Sacramento. The psych hospital did not accept me because I was paralyzed from the migraine. And so I went to the ER in Sacramento, and they were like, "Get up," and they tried to get me from the gurney to the hospital bed, but I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was blink and swallow. And they like dragged me and dropped me on the floor. And then they like I would have been surprised. I would not have been surprised if they kicked me while I was down. They were so mean. Like, they're like, "Get up, There are people here who are sick and dying, and you're just laying here pretending to be paralyzed for attention." That was a direct quote from one of the nurses. And they like each grabbed a limb and they swung me onto the bed. They would like one of the mean, I call her the mean nurse because she was mean. And she at one point she took my limp arm and picked it up and dropped it on my face twice to try to get a reaction out of me. And when that didn't work, she like snapped her fingers in front of my face, and I blinked because again I could blink and swallow. And she just was like, "Ha, I knew you were faking it." So I've had some really bad experiences with hospitals. But I'd say overall the experience has been very good. And to be honest, I have a bad habit of going to the hospital because I've been 25 times, and it seems like an escape from reality at this point. because, you know, reality is so heavy. I need to take a break so I can reprocess, get my medicines adjusted, and get back on my feet. So I'd say the hospitals helped me a lot, but of course there's always the bad ones.
And have you been in different levels of care? So it sounds like you've been in the emergency room, sometimes hospitalized. Have you been in like intensive outpatient programs or day treatment or residential treatment? Because, you know, there's
Yes.
per need, there's levels of care.
Right. I've done them all. So there's like a what's the word? Like a titration. I don't know if that's the right word, but basically it starts with the emergency room, and then you go to the hospital, and then from the hospital there's residential therapy. So you go to a house and you live there with a few other people, and they like manage your life. And but it's really good. It's my favorite thing, honestly, because you get some freedom, but you also get that organization, and you don't feel someone's telling you what to do, and sometimes you need that. And then beneath that is the partial hospitalization program, which is where you go in person for a little bit and then you go home. So you're like in person for maybe 6 hours, and then you go home and you get to do whatever you want. And then there's IOP, intensive outpatient program, where you can do it virtually or you go for a few hours and then you're free. And then there's, of course, the real world, you know. So I've done them all. And I'd say my favorite would be definitely residential treatment, just because you feel safe, you know. You feel like someone's taking care of you, and you don't have to worry about like figuring things out for yourself yet. You're just getting back on your feet, learning to shower every day again, learning to brush your teeth every day, to do a little bit of chores, and you get hobbies. I remember one residential place, they literally bought yarn for me to crochet, and I thought that was really kind of them. And so it's a really positive environment for me.
In your residential treatment that you were in, how long did it last? Because I know there can be a range of how long. It could be 3 months, 6 months, a year, potentially even longer.
So actually, for me, the residential therapy, they've always been just 1 month. I I I graduated from them pretty quickly because I'm very versatile. You know, I recover very quickly. I get back on my feet pretty quickly. I just need that little push, you know. So I would always graduate from them after a month, and yeah, and then they would put me into the partial hospitalization
So you
program.
would step down care. So
Yes,
residential, then you'd step down into,
exactly.
yeah. And if you could say something about medicine, because of course, need to prescribe the correct medicine and pay attention, right, to side effects, because we don't
Mm,
want any side effects. And then what the most effective dose, right? You don't want to
mm,
overdose someone on the medicine.
right.
And it can be and it can be a journey to figure out which medicine, if medicine is going to help.
Mm,
And also sometimes a person, especially, well, I don't know if it's especially, but I'm going to say especially anyway, especially with a mood disorder of where a person could start to feel better, you know, hypomania or mania, but you're also symptomatic.
mm.
But the person may want to stop their medicine, right?
Oh yeah.
And of course, stopping the medicine, sometimes medicine does need to be stopped, but it needs to be done in conjunction with your doctor or nurse practitioner, because it can be very dangerous to just stop medication. But could you say
Right.
something about the role that medicine has played in your life in terms of helping you?
So to put it simply, medicine saved my life. You know, a lot of people are against medicines because they don't like putting substances into their body. You know, they don't like feeling like something else is controlling them. But the truth is, medicines help. You know, but it's like you said, medicine is a journey. It's rarely going to work on the first try, and you can't give up. You can't just stop taking them because like, oh, it's not working. It's just not going to work. Well, you know what? You have to keep trying. You have to keep fighting and do what your doctors say. Always talk to your doctors, communicate with them. I went through dozens of medications before I found the right balance. And I'm still not sure if it's the right balance, but it's about like monitoring yourself and just keeping tabs with your doctor, being like, okay, this is how I feel. And like so when I was on my 2 antipsychotics, one of them started knocking me out. Every morning I would take it, and then an hour later I'd fall asleep for 2 hours. I lost a job because of that. I couldn't work because I was so tired. I almost passed out while singing at a jazz choir, like I was singing and then I just started like, whoa, because the medicine was so heavy on me. And, I told my doctor and he reduced it. And once he reduced it, I felt better, so it's about communication, um it's there's never going to be a perfect combination, a perfect dose, but there's going to be a dose that's better than a different dose, and a combination that works better than different combinations. Something I really want to say is sometimes medicines do interact with each other. A lot of the time they do, and you need to be aware of that. You need to make sure your doctor is aware of that. So if you start feeling certain symptoms, like you don't feel yourself, you have physical symptoms, like you're just, something's off, it could be the medicines interacting with each other and you need a different combination. Because what happened was my two medicines, my two antipsychotics, the Abilify and Loxapine, they were interacting with each other and I was struggling to keep it together. And I end up, I ended up getting extremely suicidal every day for like a week. And at the end of that week, I was like, you know what? I don't see my psychiatrist until a month from now. I need more immediate help. So I went to the hospital. They completely switched up my medications, but it worked. And now I'm much more together. People have told me like, wow, Al, you seem more clear headed. Like the dentist told me that I seem more clear in my head. That's how you know the medicines are working. And I'm still struggling, yes, but I'm doing better. And it's because of the medicines. If I didn't have my medicines, I probably would not be here right now because, Mo would probably have come back and taken over, or I would have gotten really depressed, or both. It's just, I wouldn't say to rely on your medications. You also have to rely on yourself and use your coping mechanisms, but medications play a huge role in keeping you healthy.
I remember when I was practicing psychiatry, because I'm a child psychiatrist, but I retired in 2023, that I would always tell my patients, youth and young adult patients, that now that you're taking medicine, if you in any way are not feeling okay, right, I don't want you to assume that it's because of the mental health problem you're having. It could be related to the medicine. So please tell me, right? And of course, don't change the dose of the medicine on your own.
Right.
Don't raise it on your own. Don't lower it on your own. Don't skip it. Let's be, as I used to say something like, as long as we communicate with each other, things are going to get better, right? That I used to say, communication is the key to success, right? And of course, too, not to mix the medicine with alcohol or other substances.
Huh?
Now, I was saying not to mix the medicine with alcohol or other
Right.
substances.
I have never drank or smoked or done, marijuana because I know, well, for one, it's not good for you. And two, I know the effect it can have with my illness and my medications. Like, marijuana and schizoaffective schizophrenia, they do not go together at all. They cause major hallucinations, major side effects. My medicines and alcohol, again, do not go together. And you have to know, if you want to participate in those things, you have to be safe about it. And you got to Google it, how does this affect my medications? How do my medications affect this? Because it can actually really cause harm to you if you're not safe about it.
Absolutely. There was an article in the New York Times this week, and it was about a woman who had had a very serious psychiatric illness in her younger years. And she has become in her words, a coach. I don't think I don't think she has certified coaching, experience, like certified as a coach, but she gives her services as a coach, and it's around helping people get off their psychiatric medication. Because in her opinion, she did not require her medication. And the article was very, very interesting. And I like to read comments. So I was reading so many comments to it. And it raised a number of concerns, which I also had, right? Not to say that sometimes a person requires a different medicine, a lower dose of a medicine. Maybe the medicine has helped the person and they've now recovered after a period of time. But I'm of the opinion that this needs to be done in conjunction with your medical healthcare provider, right?
Right.
And that if you don't have your healthcare provider in the mix, this could be very dangerous to the person. And it was very interesting, the comments, because some people were commenting about that they didn't need their medicine, right? From what I read, it seemed to be that was a bit of the minority of the comments that were written. But of course, you have to think of like who's going to write the comment, right? But there were people writing that this person, the coach, apparently had a very supportive family, had economic means, right? I don't think the person, if I'm remembering right, which I may or may not be remembering right, I don't think the person necessarily needed to work. I think that they were so well off, the family had been taking care of them. And people's comments to it talked about the additional stress of working, right? Of not having a supportive family, of having life stressors. And many people of the comments that I had read also talked about people attempting suicide, and stopping their meds, and they deteriorated. And there are also comments made of people thinking that it was not okay that the New York Times had published the article, that they felt that there needed to be a piece in that article, like the other side, that to some people it seemed that this point of view was being endorsed, and there wasn't another side of how dangerous this possibly could be.
Right.
So what are your thoughts about, I don't know, coaches telling you and in some way also encouraging to get off of medicine? Again, with the idea that sometimes a person may need to be off their medicine, but they should do that with a healthcare provider. What are your thoughts about it?
So I see both sides. I see like, yes, people want to get off their medicines. I think we all, like, if you're on a ton of medicines, you want to reduce them. That was me. But at the same time, you got to be safe about it. And encouraging people to go off their medications without like encouraging them to consult their doctors or like just to do it themselves is extremely dangerous. Because you know, your medicines are affecting the chemicals in your brain and your body. And when you disrupt that balance that's been formed, you're going to be unstable. And yes, for some people it might work, you know. There might be other, I know people use like homemade remedies, they use natural medicines and stuff like that, and it works for them. But again, you have to think about like some things, you know, you can't cure by yourself, you know. And of course there's no cure to anything, you know, it's more like just creating that balance. But you know, if you have like schizoaffective disorder and you go off the medicines that stop you from hallucinating, you're gonna hallucinate, you know. And I mean, it's not safe in my opinion. I Just because, you know, those medicines are there for a reason. And I know some people think that doctors are just trying to make money off of you by prescribing those medicines, and to an extent I agree, because the doctors, they once put me on this medicine called Vraylar that was extremely just terrible for me. You know, I was throwing up and I was so nauseous and it wasn't helping, and it cost $200 for every time I picked up a prescription of it. And so my mom got so mad. She was like, "You're getting off of that now because the doctors are just making money off of you." So I get it, you know, and then I switched to a different medication. But the thing is, instead of going off of the medication, not taking a substitute, I talked to my doctor and I went on a substitute medication. You know, because if you suddenly stop a medication, again, those chemicals in your brain are suddenly depleted, and they, you know, it's extremely dangerous, you know, and you could have serious side effects, as well as mental effects, physical effects, you know. I'd say always consult with your doctor first if you want to go off your medications. I'm not saying never go off your medications, but again, your doctor knows your doctor knows what they're doing. And if you don't think they know what you're doing, find a different doctor. But you are not your own doctor, you know. You don't have that medical training, and it's just you got to be safe about it because you don't want to cause serious harm to yourself or others.
I would agree with all that you said, but one thing I would say something a little different is that in prescribing a medication, the doctor themselves is not earning any money from prescribing that medicine, right?
Good to know. That's
Right.
what my mom
You
said.
know, you could think of big pharma, you know, are they earning some money? But the doctor themselves is not, you know.
Okay.
Yes.
But
These cases of doctors who are earning money, it's like how you endorse, you know. So if I endorse a medication, a specific medication from a certain pharmaceutical company, there's a kickback on it in this day and age with modern doctors.
I prescribed medication for what, 40 years as a psychiatrist, and
Maybe
I never
in
received a kickback.
different eras, different generations, but our doctors do get kickbacks. If they recommend to a patient a certain medication from a certain pharmaceutical company, there's a kickback that doctors are getting in 2025. Not even 2025. I'm using 2025 because we're in 2025, but this has been happening like quite recently now. I think there was even a movie about it. There was a true movie about it. I can't think of the name of it, but this doctor, he got caught out. He was arrested by the FBI, of course, because he was
Wow.
he just kept, you know, writing a script for this specific medication all the time, all the time, all the time. And you know, you get people out there that, you know, commit corruption and fraud, and then the next thing you know, a doctor is driving a Porsche, and you wonder why the doctor is driving a Porsche all of a sudden. So of course, it's raising some eyebrows, but it does happen. There's doctors who are getting kickback from pharmaceutical companies for recommending a certain medication all the time. It's happening. It's real.
Got to be careful who your doctor is. Find an
Right.
Really, you do. But then, how do we define doctors as well? You know, we also get spiritual doctors. Spirituality needs to play a huge role in a person's life as well, as much as a medical doctor. does. You know, there needs. I'm very controversial about the topic because I've just witnessed too much. You know, I'm very controversial
Mm-hmm.
about it. Are we hiding behind medication? Are we dependent on it? Do we even know who we are, or somebody dictating who we are? Um, but it's a topic for another day. You know, it's a topic for another day. You get different types of
Yeah.
doctors. You get the doctors, as I said, the traditional doctors are always going to be there to say, yes, okay, take ABC is cool. But these days, we also get spiritual doctors. These days, we can escape to a spiritual resort and we can find ourselves coming out 1 month later, fully healed, not needing to depend on medication ever again.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it also depends on the thoroughness of the assessment, right? At the very
Right.
beginning, that understanding of the multitude of factors that might be causing the emotional distress, right?
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's not just one thing. Right? People are
Right.
complicated, right? What do they call it? Bio, psycho, social, spiritual, all those factors.
Right.
I'll share a
And also,
story with you guys. It's a personal story of mine. Um, when I was a kid, and this time I was living in a different area, it was a different environment. And of course, my focus was out of tune when it came to the traditional educational system because I wasn't in sync with what I was getting told. Stuff that makes sense to me, you know. And my parents, they took me to a doctor. The doctor says, okay, I need to get onto this medication. I even still remember the name. And I think, how old was I? Like 7 or 8. And the name of this tablet was called Ritalin. And if you were on Ritalin at the time, you were labeled as insane. You're not normal, right? You're not normal. So anyway, how am I supposed to know better at 7, 8 years old? I don't
mm-hmm.
know better. The doctor is telling my parents. My parents are giving me this medication in order so I can focus, but something was off. But I'm lucky, and I know there's a lot of children that are not so lucky. Okay. You know, at 13 years old, keeping in mind now from 7 or 8 to 13, I'm on Ritalin, because this is what they are saying is the solution. I'm lucky that my parents took me out of a certain environment and not just out of a certain school, but out of a complete, now I'm going to, in South Africa, we say province, in the States, state, took me completely out of this province. New school, new beginning, new environment, and I never had to take Ritalin ever again. So there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
question marks there. Environment. Am I in the correct environment?
Mm-hmm.
Because it starts at the environment. The triangle starts at the environment, which dictates your thoughts and behavior and how you think and how you go about life. So I'm in one environment at one part in my life, and I'm told by a doctor, I'm told that I need to take Ritalin, and that's how I'm going to cope and I'm going to get through school and my life. And then all of a sudden, I move to a different environment, and Ritalin is never heard of again in my life. I never had to take it again.
Wow.
So,
Were you being prescribed that for like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? Because you're saying Ritalin, which would be
yeah,
methamphetamine.
Ritalin, yeah. Yeah, I wasn't focusing in class. I wasn't focusing in school. So, you get diagnosed as, oh no, let's just medicate him or medicate her and they're going to focus. But I just wasn't in tune with what I was getting told in school. It didn't make
Mm-hmm.
sense to me. Not because I didn't understand what the teacher was telling me. It just, I wasn't in sync. So I wasn't interested. So maybe we should put kids such as myself going through that in a place where they're going to be more interested. Let's send Kino to art school. Let's send him to music school.
Mm-hmm.
Let's moving out of that environment. Let's see what happens then. Um, you
It
know,
makes me think, the idea too, kind of the false idea, like If you only have a hammer, everything is a nail, right? If a person's only thinking Ritalin, right? Then you're not going to be thinking, well, does this young person need glasses, right? Are they being bullied in school and that's affecting the way that they're interacting? Is it a bad connection with the teacher, a relationship issue, right? Is there a learning disorder? Yeah, like, right? That we have to have a broader understanding of what's happening. And that's so great that you were able to be in a different environment, and the difficulty that you were having was no longer a difficulty.
Yeah,
Mhm.
environment plays a huge role. Honestly speaking, environment plays a huge role. And I'm saying,
Yeah,
but
it does.
there's kids out there that aren't, lucky enough where the parents can actually realize, hey, okay, let's try and move him or her and let's see what happens. Then he gets stuck, you know, and then who knows where that can go from there.
I'm thinking
Can
too,
become
there's the external environment, of course, right? And then
Right.
there's the internal environment, which you were talking earlier about, Al, right? What are we telling ourselves and repeating to
Mhm.
ourselves?
Yeah, it's all about, there's two worlds, what's outside of us and what's inside of us, and they interact, and they affect each other. So the inside, you have the brain chemistry that's forming the mental illness, but sometimes the mental illness is caused by the outside factors. For me, I had that divorce, I had my brother getting kicked out, and and then I went to college, so I had all this change happening, and it was too much for my brain. It started shutting down. It's like that movie Inside Out, where all the different parts of the brain started collapsing, and that's what happened. And I just I developed these mental illnesses, and you know now my brain's recovering, and but I'm still in a environment that's not healthy for me. I'm living in a county housing with people that are kind of toxic to me, and like one today, she straight up said she thought I was faking my illness, and I was like, this is the environment I'm living in, and it's just making things worse. That's why I keep going back to the hospital. That's why I keep having these suicidal ideations. So the outside environment definitely affects what's inside, and what's inside can affect what's outside. So if you change either one of those, it changes that balance either for better or worse. So it's very important to, put yourself in an environment, a healthy environment, surround yourself with that support system, and have just feel safe inside and out.
Yeah, 100% agreed. 100% agreed. Environment
Yeah.
is so important. The people around us on a day-to-day basis is so important. The people, not even the people that we live with, but also the people that we work with. If you're working at a company, with 50 to 100 or even thousands of people, that all plays a role with mental health. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
I'm thinking too that environment now can also include social media. And but
Yes.
what kind of
yeah,
social media are we ingesting? Is it healthy for us,
Right.
or is it just accentuating the negative?
yeah.
See, for
And we also
me,
got control of that. Oh, sorry, no,
yeah.
you first. You know,
For me, I used to have a very unhealthy relationship with social media. I would get in like arguments online with people who disagree with my views. I'd look at people, I'd like follow people who were constantly talking about like politics and stuff that just really stressed me out. And then I started looking at, I changed, and I started looking at cat videos, dog videos, videos about plants, about food, stuff that calmed me down, so that social media became a positive outlet for me, because it's entertainment. It's not supposed to hurt you, and a lot of people use it where they get toxic comments online and they take them to heart, and they get bullied, and it's not a good environment at all. So it's all about changing that outside environment again.
Yeah. And it comes down to understanding that, life and social media is about algorithm. Okay.
Mm,
Why I also say life is an algorithm is because you choose what your surroundings should actually be. If you're
I really
choosing to
like
be
that.
around negative people, then of course that life algorithm is always going to put you in surroundings with, negative people. So it's the
Hmm.
same with social media. We're not here to say don't be on social media, but learn to control the algorithm. So if I
Hmm.
am going to keep searching positive affirmations or whatever it may be, I'm going to keep getting that in my feed. And it's going to be motivational for me each time I go onto Facebook or Instagram or TikTok. But if I am going to keep feeding myself all the negativity that's happening around the world or what's happening in people's relationships and my marriage is falling apart, the algorithm is going to keep feeding me that, and I'm going to keep feeling depressed, and I'm going to keep waking up with anxiety, and I'm going to keep questioning my relationships. I'm going to keep questioning my marriage because I'm feeding
Hmm.
myself that every day. Algorithm, you know. And I learned that as well. And now when I go onto Facebook, I know I'm only going to get positive vibes because I've built my algorithm. I know when I go to Reels because I want to watch certain videos on specific topics, Reels is going to show me only that topic. Algorithm. Adjust your algorithm.
Changed your diet.
Hmm.
Yeah. No, 100%. So,
So
El, what would you say to someone who's, your life story starts at a young age, you know, to now
Hmm.
our target audience being that age group now? What's your message to them going through what you went through? What can they do now in this day and age for themselves?
I would say, the biggest thing I would say, to someone who's currently going through what I went through, is don't give up. You know, you are worthy of living. You have a purpose, and that purpose is to live. Yes, there's gonna be bumps in the road, but you have to remember that when it's life is a roller coaster. What goes down will go up. There's gonna be high points and there's gonna be low points. You just gotta enjoy the ride. You know.
Just enjoy the ride. I love that.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, just enjoy the
And,
ride.
and and be strong enough and vulnerable enough to reach out for help, right?
Always reach out for help. Never be afraid to admit weakness, because it's not weakness. It is just, it's not weakness, it's not a flaw, it's not a mistake, it's not failure. It's just you being human and needing help. And you have to remember you are a human, and you are not going to be perfect. You need you When you need help, you need to ask for it, because help is not going to find you. You have to reach out for it. And it's terrifying, to advocate for yourself and to ask for help, because people can be mean, people can look down on you, and people can, do bad things. But you have to find the right people. Always call, like, I have a crisis line that I call, for the county, and they know me by now, and I always call them when I feel slightly off, and they talk me through it. The suicide hotline is amazing. They will talk you through it. There's friendship lines. If you feel like you don't have a support system, just reach out to the hotlines. talk to somebody. Don't stew in your own stuff, just I can't emphasize enough how important it is to not let yourself be alone, because being alone is your worst enemy. Because if you don't like yourself, if you have that self-hatred, if you have what I have, no sense of self, being alone is very dangerous. And that's when those thoughts can take over and convince you that once you're alone, there's nobody left who can save you. And I want to share something with you guys. So when I first started, back before I got hospitalized this last time, I started having these uh impulses to overdose again. And I put where did it go? Anyways, my best friend gave me a little token that said just me and her, best friends for life. And I put it on top of my medicines to remind me, like, you have people who care about you. You are not alone. So when you think about taking these medicines, remember that there are people who care about you who don't want you to go.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to take a few steps
That's
back.
so beautiful that your friend gave that to you, right? And you took it to the next level, right? Because sometimes
Yeah.
we need that reminder, right? We need that visual reminder, right?
Right.
And you put it in the right place, right? People care
Yes.
about you and you're alive to them. So please stay alive.
Exactly. It just, I've known her for 9 years, and she has been one of my biggest supports. And I'm scared to, like, tell her when I'm feeling this way. I'm scared to tell her, like, to show her that side of me and tell her, like, hey, I don't feel like myself. I don't feel safe. I don't want her to worry about me. And that's dangerous. That's a dangerous way of thinking, because when you think that you're going to be a burden on people for feeling the way you feel, it's your brain trying to convince you to bet you're alone. And it's the demon trying to separate you from everyone else. That's its goal. And you have to, like, have those physical reminders. Sometimes they help, like visual or hearing, using the senses. They always, in the hospitals and programs, they talk about mindfulness, activating the five senses to remind you that you're real and that you're in the real world. And once, like, because the goal of, that suicide ideation is to convince you that you are not there, that you are not human, that you do not need to exist anymore. And so by reminding yourself, like, yes, I am human, yes, I do exist, and I'm part of this world and interconnected with it, then it's harder to sever that connection.
Reestablishing the umbilical cord to the world.
Yes.
That can nourish us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
I learned in a group I was in a therapy group, the whole world. Sorry, I'm plugging in my phone because it's trying to die. The whole world is interconnected. We are all part of the same earth. We are all part of the same existence. And when you remember that you're part of something, you're not alone, then it's harder to, like, cut that umbilical cord, to cut that connection, because it's stronger. But when you feel like there is no connection, it's easy to just say, oh, well, I'll just sever it, you know
Those ghost feelings that you're talking about.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, because your brain tries to convince you that you're a ghost, that you are a shell of yourself, and there's no point to keeping up the act, to keeping up that shell, because is pointless. And it tries to convince you that you're already dead. You feel dead inside, and it's like you just gotta go. But the truth is, you're not dead inside, because again, you're alive to other people. They see you. You're breathing. You are, like, if you're getting out of bed, you're getting out of bed. That's something. If you ate something, okay, your digestive system's working. If you were dead, your digestive system wouldn't work. You just got to remind yourself that you are functioning, even if it's not to the fullest extent, even if you're not like showering or brushing your teeth or cleaning your room, you're still alive.
You're alive, and you have, I like what you said about being a part of something, right? A former guest we had last week, Eve Duncans, talked about being part of the collective, right? That we're not alone. And going back to the idea that suicide is a liar, right? It's telling us things that are not true. Right? Any last thoughts, Kino?
I just wanted to put something out there. It's not, an answer that any one of us right now on the show is going to have. At the start of the show, you mentioned how by you attempting to commit suicide, it affected, your family. The unfortunate truth is, out there in the global world, with the billions of people we have, there's people who attempt to commit suicide who doesn't have anybody who cares. So, which means even if they survive the first attempt and nobody really cares, and maybe they have family who wish, why didn't you just go? Now you're still here. They're going to attempt it again and again, and again. So it's also that percentage of people that's out there in the world that doesn't have anybody, that's going to care whether they make it or not. As I said, it's not a solution that any one of us right here on the show can say, yeah, it's there. But I'm bringing it up on the show because, we'll post about this. Let's see where it goes.
Thinking, what you just said, Kino, and that's important. Like, what if you don't have that family or friends, or what if the relationships are bad ones?
Yeah.
Then I think my thought would be, where there's life, there's hope, right? And the possibility of making that effort to meet new people, to see if we can help someone else, right? Sometimes whatever ability we might have, are we able in some way to lift someone else up, right? Seeking that help through the 988 number, being in support groups, whether that's in person or potentially online. I think it goes back to, in a way, the paradox, because when you're suicidal, you want to give up. And yet the antidote is not to give up, right? So which side of the seesaw is going to be a little more prominent? Hopefully the not giving up point, which would be, I don't have those friends, let me down. Well, let me stay away from those people and find some new friends, right? I've learned what doesn't work, right? Now let me learn what does work. There's no, as you said before, Al, like there's no such thing as failure, right? As long as I've learned something, right, and take the next step, then I haven't failed, right? Maybe for someone who feels a void in their life, developing a spiritual practice, or going to church, right, or being out in nature, as long as I think we feel that I haven't exhausted all my options, right, in terms of feeling some type of a meaning that in my life, that today is not the day to kill myself, right?
Mhm.
Today I'm going to live, right? But you do bring up a valuable point that there can be many people who feel, well, nobody cares. And maybe in their experience, no one has cared, but that doesn't mean there won't be someone, today, tomorrow, or the next day that will. What do you think, Al?
Well, what I really want to share is that, all those times when I felt extremely suicidal, I didn't die, and that was for a reason. Because that time when I took all those pills, I told my mom, you know, I could have just not said anything, let them take over, and just wait to die. But instead, I told my mom right after. I was like, "Mom, I took these pills," and she took me to the hospital. Um, and that was because I wanted to live. Even if, because what you have to realize is that it's black.
Yeah, hi, Al.
Um, sorry about that.
you
What you have
you
to
were saying
realize
what you
is
have to
that
realize.
suicide is not. It doesn't define you. It's not who you are.